Something is shifting in the unseen realm, something that cannot be measured by instruments or explained by human logic. There are moments in history when heaven seems to whisper louder than usual moments when silence is not absence, but preparation. Tonight feels like one of those moments. Not because of fear, but because of urgency. Not because of confusion, but because of alignment. Events that once seemed scattered are now converging like pieces of a puzzle that refuse to stay disconnected. What was once dismissed as coincidence is now forming a pattern that demands attention. Many have grown comfortable with delay. They assume that because nothing has changed outwardly, nothing is changing at all. But that is the greatest illusion in times like these. The deepest shifts rarely begin in noise, they begin in stillness, beneath the surface where most are not looking. There is a line being drawn not by human hands, but by the unfolding of something far greater than human. Spanning. On one side are those who see only what is visible. On the other are those who sense that what is visible is only the shadow of something much larger taking shape. Tonight's message is not about panic, it is about awareness. Because when awareness comes, preparation follows. And when preparation comes, confusion loses its power. There are seasons when warnings are subtle, and there are seasons when they become impossible to ignore. This is not a time to chase noise, speculation, or endless theories. This is a time to discern the direction of events, to understand that what is accelerating around the world is not random, it is converging. Economies shake, nations reposition, alliances shift, and moral boundaries blur. And yet, in the middle of all this instability, there is a strange consistency. Everything is moving toward a point of culmination. The question is not whether something is happening. The question is whether it is being understood. Because understanding changes everything. Those who discern the times do not react in panic, they respond with clarity. They do not cling to illusions of permanence in a world that is clearly transitioning. Instead, they anchor themselves in what does not shift, even when everything around them does. Tonight carries that weight. Not of destruction, but of decision. There are moments when silence becomes louder than words, when the absence of clear answers forces the soul to look deeper than surface explanations. And in that searching, something remarkable happens. Clarity begins to emerge, not from outside noise, but from internal awakening. What comes next will not look like what came before. Patterns are breaking. Systems are straining. What once held steady is now revealing cracks that were always there but hidden from view. And yet this is not the end of hope. It is the beginning of clarity. Because in every era of shaking, there are those who see differently. Not because they are better, but because they are. Awareness always separates reaction from revelation. So tonight is not about fear of what is coming. It is about recognition of what is already in motion. Pay attention not to sensational voices, but to the deeper unfolding beneath them. Stay steady, not because the world is steady, but because truth does not shift even when everything else does. What happens next will not just be news. It will be a turning point. And those who understand the times will not be caught off guard. They already be positioned in awareness, ready for what follows. Something is happening beneath the surface of global events that most people are not fully aware of, even though they are living inside it every day. It is not always the loudest moments in history that carry the greatest significance. Often it is the quiet buildup, the gradual alignment of conditions that only becomes obvious when it is too late to ignore. Many assume that because life appears normal on the surface, nothing of real importance is shifting. Yet history consistently shows that the most powerful transitions begin quietly, almost invisibly, before they suddenly become undeniable. What is taking shape now is not isolated to one region or one system. It is a broader convergence of developments across political, economic, and social landscapes that seem unrelated at first glance, but are increasingly revealing a shared direction. Nations are repositioning themselves in ways that suggest long-term realignment, rather than temporary adjustment. Economic pressures are not merely fluctuations, but indicators of deeper structural strain. Social values are not just evolving, but undergoing a rapid redefinition that affects the foundations of stability itself. When these elements are viewed together, a pattern begins to emerge that cannot be dismissed as coincidence. The challenge in times like these is perception. People tend to focus on immediate concerns, daily routines, and short-term outcomes, which makes it easy to overlook larger movements unfolding over time. But those who step back and observe the broader picture begin to notice that separate events are actually interconnected. Decisions made in one part of the world ripple into others with increasing speed and intensity. Alliances shift not just for political advantage, but in response to deeper pressures that are not always publicly explained. Even economic systems, once considered stable and predictable, are showing signs of stress. That suggests they are adapting to forces greater than ordinary cycles of rise and fall. In the middle of all this uncertainty, there is a growing need for awareness rather than reaction. Fear often fills the gap where understanding is absent, leading people to interpret change as chaos rather than transition. But change itself is not inherently destructive. It is the interpretation of change that determines how it is experienced. Those who are only reacting to headlines and surface level elements may feel overwhelmed, while those who are observing patterns with discernment begin to see a different reality, one that is unfolding with direction rather than randomness. There is also a noticeable breakdown of systems that were once considered reliable. Institutions that held influence for decades are now facing credibility challenges. Economic frameworks are under pressure from multiple directions at once, exposing weaknesses that were previously hidden by stability. Even cultural and moral frameworks are being questioned and redefined at a pace that leaves little room for gradual adjustment. This acceleration creates a sense of instability, but it also reveals that what once appeared permanent was always more fragile than assumed. Despite this, the purpose of recognizing these developments is not to induce fear, but to encourage clarity. Clarity allows for stability even in unstable environments. When people understand that they are living in a time of transition, they begin to interpret events differently. Instead of being overwhelmed by unpredictability, they start to recognize direction within the movement. Instead of reacting emotionally, they begin to respond thoughtfully. What is unfolding is not random disruption, but a progression toward a larger outcome that is still taking shape. The key is not to predict every detail, but to recognize the direction of the overall movement. Those who do will not be easily shaken by sudden developments because they already understand the broader context in which those developments are occurring. What is unfolding in the world today is not a collection of disconnected events, but a tightening convergence of pressures that are increasingly difficult to ignore. Political shifts that once took decades are now occurring in short cycles. Economic instability appears in waves that cross borders within days rather than years. Social tensions rise and spread with a speed that earlier generations never experienced. When viewed separately, each of these developments can be explained away as normal fluctuation. But when viewed together, they begin to form a clearer picture, one that suggests a deeper restructuring is underway beneath the surface of global stability. Many people continue to interpret these changes through the lens of routine history, assuming that what is happening now is simply another phase of familiar cycles. Yet something about the present moment feels different in both pace and intensity. The usual patterns of gradual adjustment seem to be accelerating into rapid transitions. Systems that once relied on long-term predictability are now being forced to respond in real time to unexpected pressures. This creates a sense of instability that is not just political or economic, but psychological, affecting how individuals perceive security and certainty itself. In times like these, perception becomes as important as reality. Those who focus only on immediate headlines may miss the underlying direction of events. But those who look deeper begin to notice that seemingly unrelated developments are part of a broader alignment. Strategic alliances shift not in isolation, but in response to changing global balances. Financial systems experience strain not as isolated incidents, but as part of interconnected vulnerabilities. Even technological and informational landscapes are evolving in ways that reshape how societies function and communicate. The speed of change is one of the most defining characteristics of this era. In previous generations, major transitions were spaced out, allowing time for adaptation and adjustment. Today, however, change often arrives faster than interpretation. By the time one event is fully understood, another has already begun. This creates a condition where people are constantly reacting rather than reflecting, responding to fragments of information rather than the full picture. As a result, confusion increases not necessarily because events are incomprehensible, but because they are occurring too quickly to be processed in isolation. Yet within this acceleration, there is also a growing opportunity for clarity. When patterns are recognized even amid rapid change, a different kind of understanding emerges, one that is not dependent on predictability but on observation of direction. it becomes clear that the world is not simply spinning out of control, but moving through phases of transformation that were already set in motion long before they became visible. This realization does not remove uncertainty, but it reframes it. Uncertainty is no longer seen as chaos, but as transition. At the same time, established structures that once provided stability are being tested in unprecedented ways. Governments face internal and external pressures that challenge long-standing policies. Economies are strained by overlapping crises that reveal structural weaknesses previously hidden. By growth, social cohesion is tested by rapid cultural shifts that redefine norms faster than institutions can respond. These pressures do not operate independently, they reinforce one another, creating a feedback loop of instability that accelerates the overall process of change. In the midst of this, emotional reaction often replaces careful interpretation. Fear spreads easily when certainty declines. Speculation fills the gaps left by incomplete information. But fear alone does not lead to understanding. What is required instead is discernment, the ability to step back from immediate reactions and observe the broader movement of events over time. Those who develop this perspective are less likely to be overwhelmed by fluctuations because they are not focused solely on the surface level of events. What is becoming increasingly evident is that the current global environment is not static. It is in motion, and that motion has direction. Recognizing that direction does not eliminate uncertainty, but it provides a foundation for stability within uncertainty. And in times when everything appears to be shifting, that foundation becomes the most valuable perspective of all. The current unfolding of global events reveals a level of interconnected movement that is difficult to ignore once it is seen clearly. What appears at first to be separate crises in different regions gradually reveals itself as part of a wider pattern of pressure building across the entire world system. Political tensions rise not in isolation, but in response to shifting alliances and competing interests that are constantly adjusting to new realities. Economic uncertainty spreads across markets and nations in ways that suggest not just temporary instability, but deeper structural strain. Social fragmentation increases as cultural and ideological divisions become more pronounced, shaping how societies respond to change. When these elements are observed together, they point toward a broader transformation that is already in motion, even if its final shape is not yet fully visible. One of the most significant features of this period is acceleration. Change is no longer slow and predictable, it is rapid and often overlapping. Events that once would have taken years to unfold now develop within months or even weeks. This speed creates a situation where understanding struggles to keep pace with reality. People are constantly adjusting their expectations, yet the environment continues to shift faster than those adjustments can stabilize. As a result, there is a growing sense of instability, not necessarily because everything is collapsing, but because everything is moving at once. In such a climate, perception becomes fragmented. Individuals and societies tend to focus on immediate concerns, reacting to the most visible developments without always seeing how those developments connect to larger patterns. Headlines are consumed in isolation, and each new event is treated as separate from the last. However, when viewed from a wider perspective, it becomes clear that many of these events are not isolated at all. They are part of a chain reaction where one shift influences another, creating momentum that is difficult to reverse once it has begun. This interconnectedness is especially visible in the way global systems now respond to pressure. Financial markets react instantly to political decisions. Political decisions are influenced by social movements that spread rapidly through digital communication. Social movements themselves are shaped by economic conditions that affect daily life. Each layer feeds into the next, creating a cycle where change in one area triggers adjustment in another. This constant interaction produces a sense of instability that is not confined to one sector, but spreads across the entire system. At the same time, long-standing structures are being tested in ways that expose their limitations. Institutions that were once considered stable are now forced to adapt under pressure from multiple directions. Some struggle to maintain influence, while others attempt rapid reform in order to remain relevant. Economic frameworks face challenges that reveal vulnerabilities previously hidden during periods of growth. Cultural norms are being questioned and redefined, often at a pace that leaves little room for gradual adaptation. These developments contribute to an overall sense that the foundations of stability are being re-examined. in real time. Despite this, it is important to recognize that such periods of transition are not without structure. Even when change appears chaotic, it often follows underlying patterns that become clearer over time. What seems unpredictable at the moment can later be understood as part of a larger sequence of events moving in a specific direction. This does not remove uncertainty, but it does suggest that uncertainty itself is part of a process rather than an absence of order. Emotional response plays a major role in how these times are experienced. When people feel overwhelmed by rapid change, fear can easily take hold. Fear tends to narrow perception, focusing attention on immediate threats rather than broader context. This can lead to confusion and misinterpretation, where every new development feels more alarming than it may actually be when seen in perspective. However, when emotion is balanced with observation, a different kind of understanding becomes possible, one that recognizes both the intensity of change and the patterns behind it. What is becoming increasingly clear is that the world is not standing still. It is moving through a significant phase of transition that touches every major system simultaneously. While the outcome of this transition is not yet fully defined, the direction of movement is becoming more evident. Recognizing that direction allows for clarity even in uncertain conditions, providing a sense of stability within a rapidly shifting. Across the world today, there is an unmistakable sense that systems once considered stable are now under continuous strain from multiple directions at once. What makes this period unique is not a single crisis, but the layering of many pressures happening simultaneously. Political landscapes are shifting as nations reassess their positions in a rapidly changing global order. Economic systems are being tested by inflationary pressures, supply chain instability, and rising debt, burdens that expose structural weaknesses. Social environments are becoming more fragmented as differing worldviews and ideologies collide with increasing intensity. When these developments are examined together rather than in isolation, they reveal a deeper pattern of transformation that is reshaping the foundations of global stability. One of the defining characteristics of this era is the breakdown of predictability. In earlier times, change tended to follow a slower and more measurable rhythm, allowing institutions and individuals to adapt gradually. Today, however, that rhythm has been replaced by acceleration. Events unfold quickly, overlap with one another, and often trigger secondary effects in unrelated areas. A political decision in one region can ripple through financial markets within minutes. A technological shift can alter communication patterns across entire societies almost instantly. This speed creates a condition where adaptation struggles to keep pace with a change, resulting in a constant state of adjustment rather than stability. As this acceleration continues, perception becomes increasingly fragmented. Many people experience events in isolation, reacting to each development as it appears without always seeing how it connects to the broader picture. News cycles amplify this effect, presenting information in rapid succession without sufficient time for reflection. As a result, understanding is often shaped by immediacy rather than depth. Yet when attention is shifted from individual events to the patterns connecting them, a different reality begins to emerge, one where these developments are not random, but part of a larger process unfolding over time. This process is particularly visible in the way global systems interact. Economic structures are no longer independent of political decisions, they are deeply intertwined. Political stability is increasingly influenced by social sentiment, which spreads rapidly through digital platforms. Social sentiment, in turn, is shaped by economic conditions that affect daily life. This interconnectedness creates feedback loops where pressure in one area intensifies strain in another, accelerating the overall pace of change. What once operated as separate domains now function as a tightly linked system, amplifying both stability and instability depending on the direction of movement. At the same time, long-established institutions are being forced to confront challenges that reveal their limitations. Governments face growing complexity in managing both internal and external pressures simultaneously. Financial systems are exposed to vulnerabilities that become more visible during periods of stress. Cultural frameworks are undergoing rapid redefinition, often faster than institutions can respond. These shifts do not occur evenly, but in waves that create periods of sudden adjustment followed by brief stabilization before the next wave arrives. This rhythm contributes to a sense of ongoing uncertainty where equilibrium is constantly being tested. In such an environment, emotional responses often intensify. Uncertainty can lead to anxiety, and rapid change can create a perception of instability that feels overwhelming. However, emotional reaction alone does not provide clarity. When fear dominates interpretation, it becomes difficult to distinguish between temporary disruption and long-term transformation. This is why discernment is essential. Discernment allows individuals to step back from immediate reactions and observe the broader direction of events rather than being consumed by their surface appearance. When viewed through this wider lens, what appears chaotic begins to reveal underlying structure. The accumulation of global pressures is not random but directional. It reflects a transition from one phase of global organization to another, where old systems are being tested and reconfigured under the weight of new realities. This does not mean that every detail is predetermined or easily understood, but it does suggest that current instability is part of a larger movement rather than disconnected turmoil. Recognizing this does not remove uncertainty, but it changes how uncertainty is perceived. Instead of being seen purely as disorder, it can be understood as transition. And in moments of transition, clarity comes not from predicting every outcome, but from understanding the direction in which the world is moving in the present global moment. There is a growing realization that the world is not simply experiencing isolated disturbances, but undergoing a deep and interconnected transition that touches nearly every system at once. Political, economic, and social structures are not shifting independently. They are increasingly influencing one another in ways that create compounding pressure across the entire global framework. Nations are adjusting their strategies in response to rapidly changing alliances and emerging power balances. Economies are reacting to uncertainty with volatility that reflects deeper structural concerns rather than temporary fluctuations. Societies are wrestling with internal divisions that are becoming more visible and more intensified under the strain of rapid change. When these elements are considered together, they form a picture of a world in motion, not toward stability, but through a significant phase of transformation. At the heart of this transformation is the collapse of long-term predictability. For much of modern history, change followed a relatively gradual pace. Systems were able to adapt over time, and institutions had space to respond to emerging challenges without being overwhelmed. Today, that rhythm has fundamentally changed. Events now unfold with remarkable speed, often overlapping and influencing one another in real time. A single geopolitical decision can trigger immediate economic reactions across continents. A technological breakthrough can alter communication, commerce, and even cultural behavior within a short span. This acceleration compresses the time available for understanding, forcing individuals and institutions alike into constant reaction mode. As a result, clarity becomes harder to maintain. People tend to process events in isolation, focusing on the most immediate and visible developments without always recognizing how those developments fit into a broader system. This fragmented perception is reinforced by the rapid flow of information where constant updates leave little space for reflection or synthesis. Yet beneath this surface-level fragmentation, there is an underlying structure that becomes more visible when attention is shifted from individual events to long-term patterns. These patterns reveal that many of the changes taking place are not random disruptions, but interconnected movements within a larger process of global realignment. This interconnectedness is especially evident in the way different systems now depend on and influence each other. Economic stability is no longer separate from political stability. Both are tightly bound to social sentiment and global communication networks. Political decisions are increasingly shaped by economic pressures, while economic outcomes are influenced by social reactions that spread almost instantly across digital platforms. This constant feedback loop creates a dynamic environment where change in one area rapidly amplifies effects in others, increasing both complexity and instability. Meanwhile, traditional institutions are under growing strain. Governments face the challenge of managing rapid change while maintaining internal cohesion. Financial systems are exposed to vulnerabilities that become more apparent during periods of stress and uncertainty. Cultural frameworks are evolving at a pace that challenges long-standing norms and expectations, leading to friction between established traditions and emerging perspectives. These pressures do not occur in isolation. They intersect and reinforce one another, creating a layered environment of continuous adjustment. In such conditions, emotional responses often become heightened. Uncertainty can easily translate into fear, and fear can distort perception. When people feel overwhelmed by rapid and unfamiliar changes, they may interpret instability as collapse rather than transition. However, emotional reaction alone does not provide a complete understanding of what is happening. Without perspective, it becomes difficult to distinguish between short-term turbulence and long-term transformation. This is why observation and discernment are essential tools in times like these, allowing for a more balanced interpretation of unfolding events. When stepping back from immediate reactions, a broader picture begins to take shape. The world is not simply disintegrating into chaos, but moving through a structured process of change that is affecting every major system simultaneously. This process is complex, uneven, and often difficult to interpret in real time, but it is directional rather than random. Recognizing this direction does not eliminate uncertainty, but it reframes it. Uncertainty becomes part of transition rather than evidence of disorder. Ultimately, the significance of this moment lies not only in what is happening, but in how it is understood. Those who are able to see beyond isolated events and recognize the broader movement of global systems will not interpret the present through confusion alone. Instead, they will begin to perceive a world in transition, one that is moving through instability toward an as yet unfolding outcome that is still taking shape.